Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Sam.
And I'm Dan.
And in this episode, we're covering the closing chapters of Hannah Kane's Sunbringer. Elo is lying in wait for Aaron as his plan to save the city of Leskia crumbles, hoping that with one strike, the former Knight Commander can end the life of the man he loved. Inara begins to realize the true extent of her power to control gods, and she imbues the deities of Leskia with levels of power they've never experienced before. Kissen finds herself at the mercy of a supposedly dead woman, Lesser Kreia, who is storming King Aaron's capital on the hunt for revenge. Change is in the air, and it smells like something's burning, because Heseth's followers have reached Midron, and no one is safe. So, final part of Sunbringer, the end of the second book in Hannah Kane's Fallen Gods Trilogy.
Yeah.
And I think in previous episodes we've kind of referred to the midpoint of a trilogy, and this end point really feels Empire Strikes Back. You know, things haven't gone as planned.
No, not at all. I think it's left me with very mixed feelings.
Interesting. Well, I'm very intrigued to hear about them.
Yeah. Shall I take us through a whistle-stop recap, which may feel a bit more than just whistle-stop?
I mean, as we'll cover, those chapters feel pretty whistle-stop at times.
Indeed,
but yeah. If you cover the basic events, and then we can loop back to discuss how we feel about them.
Yeah, indeed. So, after humiliating Antok, a commander of the king's army who rides into Leskia to address the people, Elo begins to grow suspicious when the king doesn't immediately respond. He and Naya ride to Lord Yether's home, where they discover that his son, Baloris, has killed Yether and plans to place the blame on Elo and force Leskia's forces to join with the side of the king. With Captain Farok's help, Elo and Naya are able to escape, and they head to Canavan's pub, the Queen's Way, to hide out. Canavan is drowning his sorrows and reveals to them that there was a rebel plot to overthrow Sakra that was enacted after the king set off for Leskia. Meanwhile, Skedi and Inara's relationship has grown strained. While flying through the city, though, Skedi overhears a group of archivists planning to hand Tele and their group of rebels over to the king's guard. Skedi relays this message and insists that they must leave as soon as possible. Their barge, full of forbidden archive materials, sets off on the canal, but things kick off when Solemn can't hold his tongue during a confrontation with some of Yether's guard, now loyal to the king, and then the other archivists appear and out them as traitors. Inara recognises one of the guards as one of the knights who was present when her family home was burned down. With rage flowing through her, she reaches out to the canal god Dafer and makes an offering in exchange for him helping them to fight off and escape the guards and the peril they are facing. She drips her blood into the canal, and Dafer remarks gleefully on how powerful it is. Once clear of the guards, Inara disembarks the barge to find Elo. Skedi objects, and Inara says they should go their separate ways before setting off alone. Not long later, Skedi regrets his decision and pursues Inara, but not before Tele gives him a scroll to give to Inara that pertains to the origins of her power. He flies over the city and spots Inara, and they reconcile. After considering the scroll, Inara thinks she understands more about her power and uses the word haven, suggesting a link to the god of safe haven, Yusuf. Inara arrives at the Queen's Way and tells Elo, Naya and Canavan that she has a plan to rally the gods against the king and his forces, who are now marching into Leskia. Inara successfully summons gods to aid in the rebellion, starting with Kelt, the god of broken sandals, and including Mercuron, the rosebush god, and Dafer. Canavan and Lethan pledge their support as well as they prepare to confront the king's forces. Inara makes an offering of her hair by cutting off her braid and instructs the gods to do what they can to force the king's forces back. Skedi sows discord among both the soldiers and the civilians watching, and chaos breaks out when Dafa makes the canal break its banks and Lethan summons the shadow demons. The king's forces are heading towards the archives, and Mercuron blocks the way with an enormous rosebush bramble that seems impenetrable. Elo takes up a hiding spot, awaiting the king's arrival to hopefully confront and kill him, but Naya arrives with a group of 50 or 60 peaceful protesters who set up to block the path for the king's column. Growing frustrated, Aaron instructs his godkillers to kill the gods Inara has summoned. After initial optimism, the king's forces begin to overwhelm their fight back. Canavan and Mercuron fall in the battle, and Dafa flees back to the canal. Finding themselves caught in the rosebush bramble and being pursued by the king's Vega, Inara makes another offering to Skedi to give him the strength to help them escape. He flies them into the archives. Right outside, Elo watches on as Vega begin to attack Naya's peaceful protest group, and some break through and head into the archives. Elo intervenes and kills some of them, but Naya stops him and doesn't want him to protect them. At this point, the king arrives with his column. Inara and Skedi see the Vega enter the archives in search of Cyan, and although Inara plans to shoot the Vega with a bow and arrow to protect Cyan, she is stopped by Kelt, who appears and trips her up just as she is getting into position. As Elo verbally spars with Aaron, Cyan is hauled out of the archives by the Vega, and Inara lines up a shot with her bow to save her from the Vega about to kill her. When Inara shoots, Elo takes advantage of the distraction to attack Aaron. As they fight, Inara and Skedi spot a distant fire coming from the city of Daysmouth, where Yatho and Tele were headed. Jumping over to Kissen's story, having been captured by armed guards upon her arrival in Sakra, she meets their commander, and it turns out to be none other than Lesser Kreia, Inara's mother. Kissen explains her message from Arn regarding the need to unite behind Aaron to prevent Heseth's victory, and also tells her story of their journey to Blenraiden with Inara. However, Lesser doesn't seem to believe that Inara is still alive until Kissen mentions Skedi, and her reaction reveals to Kissen something of Inara's divine nature and heritage. After this, she is imprisoned in a cellar, but escapes the chains by breaking her own hand to slip free, just before a series of giant blasts cave in the walls and ceiling. She enters the king's keep, which was obviously the target of the giant explosions, and races to find Lesser. As she attempts to convince Lady Kreia that she is trustworthy, the rebels force their way into the king's quarters, where they see a man standing in the hearth of the fire. Back in Leskia, Elo thinks he has beaten Aaron, but after stabbing him through the heart, Aaron opens the visor of his helmet for the first time since leaving Sakra, revealing there to be no flesh, but only twigs, a creation of Hestra. Aaron pulls Elo into an embrace, and twigs, moss, and flame begin to cocoon them. At that moment, Skedi appears, the size of a lion, with Inara on his back, and they fly at the king and Elo, crashing into them. Moments later, they awake in the fireplace in Aaron's quarters in Sakra, where Kissen and Lesser Kreia are watching them from inside the king's rooms. Inara uses her power to subdue Hestra, and Aaron begins to die without the god's power. Kissen makes an offering to Arn to come and explain what is happening. The god shows that Talitian and Restish forces are attacking Midran in Heseth's name, and that Aaron needs to survive if they are to fight back. After Kissen pleads with her, Inara releases Hestra, and Aaron is revived, and she can see that Elo is dreading the war that faces them. In the epilogue, Heseth's forces advance through Midran, culminating in her fiery rebirth with a Bridite heart, heralding a new chapter of conflict. So that is a not so brief summary, hopefully capturing most of what's important. So yeah, I mean, how did you feel? I think I always think once you've got to the end of a book, it's time to view it as a whole and kind of go to that top level. How did you feel about it?
Continued to enjoy it. I feel this book was quite different from the first one in terms of how it's structured, what the characters are doing. There was still that core. I think all the core characters were still the same. They're going through change, but it's not like I feel like these were different. Hannah Kaner was writing different characters with the same names. These are still those same characters we have from the first book who are going on this journey. It's just they're doing events that feel so different, and I feel like because the stakes are higher, it's taken on a different tone. The general story. I guess we kind of knew it was heading in this way. The first book ended with the implications that Heseth has grander plans and there's more to come. But things have got dark. What did you think?
Yeah, I guess because it's the first sequel that we've read.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's fair or not to be immediately then comparing it to how I felt about the first one. So I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed Godkiller. And I think largely that is because the thing that I think probably most people would love about the first one was like those characters coming together and almost becoming this sort of found or like chosen family type of thing. And you just totally lost that dynamic from this book altogether. And it wasn't as though it even really came back together at the end, because we didn't get enough time. That whole sequence in that last chapter was, like 10, 15 minutes worth of interaction, really.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think despite so many similarities between the two books, that core that's changed, the thing that really makes it feel different. You've got put your finger on it exactly. Is that it was at its best when they were all together.
Yeah.
And this book hasn't been that. Even with Elo and Inara being in the same city, they're purposefully doing different things.
Yeah.
And they've almost become our eyes and ears in different areas of the story. So like we're seeing, like it's a good way for us to get the full scope of what's going on. It's not just localized to the king and his court. It's not just localized to our heroes. It's affecting everybody. And it gives us that grand sweep. But as a result, we lose what you're saying, which is the dynamic between the three main characters.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself a bit frustrated at, like, thinking back to, it might have even been the first section of the book where obviously they've gone to confront Canavan and then Elo ends up staying with Canavan. And I'm like, on reflection, thinking, why did he have to stay at Canavan's? Like, they're literally in the same city. They've just walked there from Yatho and Tele's house. Why couldn't he have just come back and Canavan be like, just come and meet me tomorrow?
Yeah.
You could have kept Elo and Inara and Skedi more connected. That felt, on reflection, a bit arbitrary.
And especially the great thing about Godkiller was there were those scenes where they were just sitting down by the fire, or the lovely one in the lake where they're all just relaxing and having those moments.
Yeah.
Because there was that big time jump of several weeks in the middle of the book, it just felt like that opportunity for greater development of character was lost.
Yeah. And there's some really interesting stuff with some of the sort of side characters. But I think that's also potentially a bit of a symptom of having separated our main protagonists from each other, is that you have more reliance on some of these side characters. But as we've sort of talked about with how the book's structured, I'm not really 100% sure that lots of them get enough development.
No.
And they start to feel a little bit like sort of computer game NPCs.
Yeah, but saying that, like, in the first book, there was Canavan mentioned, and when it was like, oh, he was the one who put the curse on you, and we were like, him? Why him? Turns out he was more involved in it. So maybe we will get more, because you've got Solom and Cal, the two other archivists, as well as Yatho and Tele, so maybe there'll be something there, but, is someone else going to go and chat to them? Because they're on their way to Daysmouth, or not. being intervened by a big pile of restless ships.
Yeah.
So,
But it's like I think my feeling about it was that you go from having these really sort of intense interactions with these side characters to no real like follow through with lots of them. So, you have this big thing about, Tele having lied to Yatho about being involved with the rebellion, and we watch actually what's quite a sort of detailed conversation explaining all of Tele's motivations and things like that. And then they just sort of drift away as characters. It's like, Inara gets off the barge and we never see them again.
Yeah.
And, you have the same with Tele and Inara. Seemingly they're developing this close bond. But again, like there's no real sort of follow through on that. Elo and Naya, I would say, is quite a similar thing where like it felt really intense at moments and then...
I mean, you thought they were destined to be a couple.
Like I had sort of chemistry vibes, but it just kind of didn't feel like a follow through in a lot of those situations. Whereas with Canavan, it genuinely did. Like the build up actually was really good. Like our understanding of why he does what he does, and then even his death actually felt quite emotional. I was like, oh, I didn't really expect to feel this way about.
Yeah, there was
Canavan.
definitely some emotional weight to those moments.
Yeah.
I mean, but again, it was all happening so fast. There was a lot of it. It's like Canavan's down. Oh my goodness! And then the Machiaron was also killed, and they're like, oh, and also Meira's dead. The ink snake god also gone. It's all happening like as everything's going tits up for the rebels, and there's that doomed element of it as we find out that it was supposed to be a distraction. Lesser Kreia, that absolute ruthless woman, was like, well, of course I'll let a bunch of them die and all this stuff happen because we've got the greater target of going to Sakra.
Yeah.
And and I think for the overall, again, it's that overall plot line. I think there's some really effective stuff there. That the fact that was happening and it becomes this more political, kind of cynical, element as Lesser Kreia becomes a more prominent figure in this book, albeit very late on.
Yeah.
But again, as you say, we're losing the main characters to the grander political plot and all the other events, and the people they're having these personal interactions with are all just swept away, and very effective for showing how insignificant these individuals can be, these ones we've tried to become connected with. But it doesn't mean we don't feel a bit cheated that we're not getting enough time and then they're swept away from us.
Yeah. Yeah, even with Lesser though, like it felt like we just needed more time with her. Like, and my reflection on, especially, having written that recap is like, oh, well, that was really quick for me to get through Kissen's chapters.
Yeah.
And it just didn't feel like we had much.
And there were 3 chapters of Kissen's, maybe even 4, where we pick up with her from where we left off in the previous episode. She's interrogated by Lesser and proves that she's, tries to prove that she knows Inara. She gets put into the basement. There's an explosion. She comes out. She interrogates that soldier to find out what's going on. She heads into the castle, and then she confronts Lesser as she's battering down the door to get into Aaron's quarters.
Yeah.
That could have all been one chapter.
Yeah.
And some of them are just 2 pages, 3 pages.
Yeah.
So it's really short. And I feel that Hannah Kaner's approach was, if I do lots of short chapters, it's like, cut here, cut there, it's action, it's all happening at the same time. But I wouldn't have minded a bit more of a continuity with a single storyline, because it almost screeching whole, smash cut to the next scene. And we're in mid-flow. So it doesn't actually help the pace. I'd argue that it kind of undermines it, because you have to be like, okay, so we had 2 pages where she just ran out and she grabbed a guy and she was like, "What's going on?" And then we have to go and read another 5 pages of Elo, and then we're coming back to it. Just give these events their space. Make those 3 or 4 chapters one 15, 20 page chapter where we actually get to see her move through these events. It doesn't feel so choppy.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. But also, in addition to that, I just think we needed more. Like it just on reflection feels like you might have been better off just making a decision. We either have to have loads of this person, or we chop them out of this book altogether, or they fly through the fireplace at the end, and that's where we rejoin Kissen, and then we find out, in the next book where she's been. Because I think you're right. Like it. When actually you say that could have all just been one chapter, what that says to me is that something that you're kind of forcing in there for the sake of it? Imagine the mystery of that coming through to that at the very end, where you've got Kissen and Lesser Kreia in the king's quarters as they come back through, and Inara and Elo being like, what the
even if you did it that, you had the story run up to where Elo and Inara get to, and then you have it in the same book, just jump back, say, how did we get here? But I think you're right. Moving it to a 3rd book would have been a great reveal. Like at the end of the first one, have us think that she's dead. Have this be about Elo and Inara and the grief. So we go on that journey as well. We're thinking, okay, they're moving on from Kissen. How do these two form a new friendship when Kissen was the central point of them? She was the mother figure to Inara. She was this potential romantic interest to Elo, the one who saved him and brought him back from where he was, this broken man. And they're just like, well, we formed a family and now it's just the 2 of us. What do we do? Like that, you're right. That would have been a much better dynamic to have. Yeah. And just because if we didn't know she was alive, we would have been there too.
Yeah.
And said, well, what do we do without Kissen, who was the main character? Like, what a bold move. And then, of course, some people would have been critical of like, oh, it turns out she's not dead. But she's done that with a lot of characters in this book, so I don't think it matters so much. If you've got Lesser, Seth, and Kissen, then, it's not too bad. And we would be able to find out what she was up to, and following like Seth's rise and fleeing and move it. But to look at the stuff that we were given, it was really good. I loved Kissen's bits of journey that we had. It just wasn't the full journey.
Yeah, we love her as a character. We've established this in our annual awards ceremony. So we love Kissen, and it's coming from a place of wanting more of that. But also, you do have to kind of look at the book as a whole when you finish it. And I think, like you said, I was enjoying it while I was reading it, and I thought what this book did well was kind of build the politics of Midrun quite well, and it added to the initial world building that we'd had in the first book, which was more focused around understanding the way that humans and gods interact with each other. This added a lot more political intrigue around the king's power and how the cities across Midrun operate. And I think we really enjoyed getting to see Leskia and having this sort of Renaissance type of, city based around almost like a university, learning environment. And I would have liked a bit more of Sakura, but I hope maybe we might get more of that in the 3rd book. Who knows?
I mean, I completely agree. Like the world building continued to be absolutely top notch. Yeah, and like you say, like we got different aspects of how the gods and the politics worked. The first one, it was so closely monitoring, like following Kissen's experience, and then Skedi being this own little god, and everything else was events of the past. And now we're talking to more of these gods. They're becoming less abstracted. They're not all just in Blen Raiden, trapped seemingly. They're out in the world still. And we're realizing that, we've covered this in the previous episodes of this, like that we see the good and the bad of these gods and what they can do. The reasons why people in the previous book, you could almost come away being like, oh, the people who follow the gods, it's because they're crazy, and I don't really understand why they worship them. Whereas, in this one, we saw genuine positives. On the day to day, you've got the Incas. They need the god to help them be skillful. There's so many cool little things that you
Yeah.
just pray to. The continuing love of Celt.
Mm.
Although I will say with Celt, it even kind of, and again, the continued good world building, though, but the way that Celt repaid their debt is like, I owed you a favor. And by doing that, what I'm doing is I'm going to break your sandal so that you smack your head so that you can't get killed by the Vega. I mean, I know this is your one thing that you do. You break sandals or fix sandals, but there was a better way to do it, surely. And it was just that brutal kind of even that tiny god was
Yeah.
like, I'm going to do something that really hurts you, but I'm going to insist that it was actually for your own good. And it's such a kind of well, this is just how gods are, big or small. They're doing stuff that you don't always understand, that's sometimes pretty horrible, supposedly for your betterment.
Yeah. Yeah, and in addition, we got more time interacting with gods in this book alongside that kind of political world building thing. We also, got to spend more time talking to Arn and, Lethan, and Lethan and Canavan's thing kind of, I think, added to that along the way. Cyan and that whole thing. And yeah, there were definitely things that I really enjoyed. Some of the atmospheres that she built, I think, actually, it probably was a good thing during the battle that it did feel a bit chaotic. That sense of chaos and sort of ramping up of the carnage and the intensity was really good. Here's a question: should and I know you've got strong views on trilogies and books kind of tying off their loose ends and stuff. Should the second book in a trilogy be able to be read as a standalone book and make sense to a reader?
Yes.
So I don't think this one could have been at all.
No, not at all. But it's something I just have to accept about book series. There are so many books these days, these fantasy series, that are just created as effectively one story spread across 3 books. What people need to remember as well is that, one of the ones that set this model, Lord of the Rings, it was written as a single book. Tolkien didn't want it to be split into a trilogy. The 3 names were almost practically created by the editors. He never revealed what the 2 towers were. Sure, it's supposed to be Isengard and Mordor, but he never confirms this because he's like, I don't know, who cares? It was just an arbitrary name for the middle bit of the book because the publishers thought a single massive book of 1,200 pages was going to be too intimidating.
Yeah.
So we need to accept that this is supposed to be one book and it should have been published that way, but they don't like to publish big books because people get scared about big books. It's the same reason why I think we've not yet touched upon a book that's kind of broached 700, 800 pages because it's a lot to get through. But that's really what we're doing. We're just spreading it over a greater period of time and buying 2 parts of it separately so far.
Yeah.
So if you're going to release a book that's a separate book, treat it like it's its own thing. Someone could walk in and pick that up. Don't say if you want to buy this one, you got to go buy the other one first. Have it that you can have a little bit of an introduction to the characters in the book, and they have their own adventure. And yeah, there can be some overarching things that make you want to go and read the other books. I mean, I point to one of my favorite fantasy series as a child, which is the Red Bull series. Does it perfectly because sometimes it jumps forward generations, but it's all you're drawn to the world, you're drawn to the setting. Sometimes the characters come and go, and I think that's probably some of the best stuff because you can pick up the Red Bull series wherever you blooming well want, and you can still read that one book and have a great time.
Yeah.
These books need to be treated differently when we're doing them as a trilogy, because it just shouldn't have any pretensions to not being to being an individual book, because it isn't. It isn't. It's just the publishers are releasing the second part of one book.
Yeah. I mean, I thought that would be your answer, to be honest.
but then here's the thing with this, is that if it was written as a single book, the tonal shift, if you were reading it as a single book, would be a huge screeching left turn.
Yeah.
You know, it would just be this kind of like, oh, okay, suddenly we're getting these short chapters. So because Hannah Kane has written it mentally as a second book, she's treated it quite differently. She's tried to take in a different approach. And if she'd have just written it as one whole thing, we probably wouldn't have ended up with this structure and had this gap where maybe the editor was like, oh, you need to try this to try and do this.
Yeah.
Like there wouldn't have been that consideration of how to structure this. And I think that probably the book would have been better if it had been treated more as a continuation.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I agree with you there. So zooming out to the kind of overall, that overarching storyline around Heseth, my other question here is, and I'm not sure how I feel about this, is like the Heseth thing starts off in this book, in Kissen's storyline, as like the big thing going on in the world. And obviously part of the thing about each story we view through each of the main characters, I guess, once Kissen leaves Delicia and goes away from that, we don't really get any follow-up until all of a sudden Skedi and Inara look over in the distance and see some flames coming from some city that apparently they can see from Daysmouth. So basically my point is we start off with this big, like, Heseth's not dead, you know, Talisian and Restish forces are working together to bring her back. And then it just kind of disappears for a while throughout the book. And I don't know how I feel about whether that's okay or whether there was more opportunities using gods, perhaps, to link what's building in that aspect of the story, rather than just being like, we're going to have like the first third of the book be kind of super full on about these fanatics around Heseth, and then we're just going to bin that off until book 3.
I agree with what you're saying, because it ties in with the thing you were saying about Kissen. Like, move Kissen and then the Heseth stuff to that third book. You know, have all of that, because the stuff we get about Heseth is all in Kissen's chapters.
Exactly.
So it becomes more about Heseth's return, and that being the threat. So again, by having them as separate books, maybe that should have been more the case. You know, have this being about Elo needs to deal with Aaron. That's what this story is. Like, the Heseth stuff is in the past of the first book. It's in the future of the third book. Keep it more there and move the Kissen stuff over there. If you want, and you're right, if you wanted to make it more, absolutely have it that, you know, you've got other gods, not just Arn saying, oh, I'm not happy about this Heseth stuff. Like, have it being that other stuff's being affected. You know, when you had in the forum, they were talking about Yusuf's shrines coming back.
Yeah.
We didn't get anything then, did we, about Heseth? Perfect time. You know, and it ties it more into the current events that we're really dealing with. But because it is so segmented off into Kissen's chapters right up until the end when you see the flames, it makes it feel like a separate book.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, and I like the conversation we're having here is really, it's troubleshooting for this book. I feel like this is a conversation that Hannah Kane should have had with her, like some other people providing advice on this, like, you know, where to move this stuff off to, because that's what this book needed. And I think that's where I'm going to settle with a lot of this book, is that I love the events. I think it's all really interesting. It continues on a story that I continue to really want to read, but it's structured poorly. And it reveals too little by what they've given us. So you need to either rein it back or go more in. And you can apply that criticism to about every single character's plotline.
Yeah.
Inara, as the now pretty much confirmed daughter of Yusuf, god of Safe Haven. And she's now realizing that he was the god of Safe Haven, and the safe haven for humans, and now she's the human of safe havens for gods. Like she's almost like the inversion of him, right? But she has this ability to control them
Yeah.
and manipulate them. I didn't quite understand how her powers manifesting as a part of descending from him, because with Canavan, like he seemed to be able to embody the wildness of Lethan, summoning the illusions of the shadow beast that she controlled. And while Skedi can exist without a shrine because of Inara's power, why she got this other stuff that allows her to control gods? How is that tied into the power?
Yeah, that's interesting. That is. Yeah, I hadn't really considered that. My main thing had been I didn't quite follow how she sort of realized what she was. So Tele gives her this scroll,
I feel like,
and then all of a sudden she's like, "I think I know what I am now."
Haven, of course, that one word, it's unlocked everything.
Yeah, I'm glad that. Okay, I'm really glad that you said that as well, because I was like, I'm sure I listened a couple of times. I was like, huh?
Yeah. Again, she seemed to have knowledge that other characters had talked about. Like there was pieces that she'd seen here and there because of Skedi's association, but because she can harbour any god without a shrine, and it just so happens that he's used to have a shrine with Yusuf. Like, I guess that thematically it links, but it also feels like a bit of a leap because it doesn't dictate that that's why he's the one that she's harboring as a safe haven.
Yeah.
And
also, I think quite a long time ago we talked about like having bodies of evidence for making decisions within books. It's like, well, there's one god that you're safe haven for.
Yeah.
As far as we know.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't actually necessarily kind of extrapolate
at least
to
get some more points so we can extrapolate, please.
Yeah.
And we know that Lesser spent a lot of time sailing. Yusuf was a god associated with sailors. So there's the little threads there. But for Inara to know it felt like a bit of a leap. We as the reader can know, and it's almost like she's using Inara to help confirm to us what we already had as, I say as a suspicion. I think in the previous episode I was like, no, it's going to be a different god. It's not going to be Yusuf. They're making too much of a thing of that. But turns out it is just leading up to this so that Inara can have that revelation herself.
Yeah.
But to talk about Lesser Kreia, I thought she was a really cool character. Like, I really got the measure of her quite quickly. Like, she's brutal, and she's gonna betray Inara for the greater cause. And I wouldn't be surprised if she was fully aware that her manor was gonna get burned. She was like, "Well, this is what we need to do."
Yeah, Inara's reaction to her in that last chapter is also interesting, isn't it? Where she says, "I've already grieved for you." Like, and I was like, there's been these moments throughout where she feels really sad about her mother dying, and then when she actually sees her mother again, there's not like an immediate gushing of.
I'm really curious as to what the dynamic was between Inara and Lesser when before all the events of these books, because I assumed prior to this it might have been a bit more loving. But it seems like it was actually quite a distant relationship.
I think it would be really great if there was a little bit more of a, I'd always looked up to you and idolized you, but then since I kind of found this new family that actually showed me what real love and care and attention is, I've realized that actually you were a little bit toxic.
Yeah. And tell you what, actually, there was more of those flashbacks within the mental train of thought of the character in the first book, and you didn't really have that in the second book. You had a brief glimpse of it when Elo is racing through the city and flashes back to the Battle of Blenraden, when you've got the mad monks, but you don't really get anything beyond that. But that's part of Elo's PTSD of being a soldier. The other, it would have been nice to have Inara flashing back more to her mother. Especially because she's being introduced as an actual living character now.
Yeah.
But
I think, and it'll be interesting whether it becomes a book about kind of found and chosen family versus,
Oh yeah, there's undoubtedly
biological
going to be
family.
an
I
element
think
of that. Yeah.
that sort of seems maybe to be what that was being set up for
Well,
in that last
especially
chapter.
because she was so happy to see, like, Kissin was like, "Oh my god, it's so great to see you! Big hugs! I'm going to take you away from Aaron's blade and keep you safe." And Lesser was just standing there, going, "Oh God, my feelings."
Yeah,
You know,
but immediately it was like, come away from that. It was like orders and instructions and stuff.
yeah,
It
and
wasn't treating her like a sort of autonomous grown up.
and there was like a party line she decided on. Kissin is mad and dangerous. You come away from. It didn't even refer to her. Yeah, it didn't refer to her as Kissin. It was come away from danger. You know, like that is the whole thing, and it's like, well, she's not though. Kissin isn't like because of all she's provided so much evidence, and so I'm worried you're going to be a very arbitrary character. I mean, I think you're going to be a very complex and difficult character, and we're going to be with her quite a bit in the next book. But I don't think I'm going to like her unless she changes. But you see that little glimpse. You see the little glimpse when Kissin's flirting away with her. She's like, "Oh, what would you do with your tongue?" And you're just like,
Yeah.
so she is human. With Aaron creating Stickman version,
Oh yeah, that's good. Yeah, I had
is
that
this
on my
going
list
to be
as
how
well.
he becomes to embody a new avatar? I mean, I'm going to keep pushing our theory that he splits onto a god version, and we've now got him existing in a second body. Granted, he has control over it, but could it be leading to it in the third book, or is that now being curtailed because they're not going to allow him to do it because of the whole restish stuff?
Well, so the question I had was, is the takeaway from this that Hestra was just using Aaron to get the adulation, and that actually Aaron could never have ascended himself to godhood? The only way he was ever going to have a taste of that type of worship was in that situation where
She can, yeah.
he stands in the hearth of a fire and can
And
connect to
I'm
Hestra.
assuming that the praise that he was getting from the people cheering on the cities as they went, because it was also to Hestra, who's like, "Oh, I told you this would work," or whatever it was in one of his small chapters. That's the praise that's allowing her to keep creating this body so far away from where he actually is back
Yeah.
in Sakura, because that's the worship that keeps the magic going.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, like, towards the end of the book, it was he was not a god yet. Perhaps he never could be. I think we're seeing the characters questioning this.
Yeah.
I think that was Anara's perspective.
My takeaway was that I wasn't feeling like we were closer to Aaron becoming a god like he had hoped. And I didn't know whether that was something that he was aware wasn't possible, or whether it was Hestra just literally exploiting his desire to achieve that and saying, well, this is how you can do it.
Yeah.
And then Hestra's getting all of the worship herself.
Yeah. Again, we're seeing these different dynamics that exist between gods and humans. And I think it's almost like Hannah Kane is experimenting with them as well as establishing them, because that flow between Hestra and Aaron seems quite radical, like it's not been done in this world before. And similarly with what Inara's doing, that's not been done before, even though Canavan shows that the halflings, the half gods, the demigod kind of people have existed. No one's ever done what Inara's done before.
And I get the sense when I'm reading that Hannah Kane can really see what she's writing.
Yeah.
Very, very sort of clearly and vividly in her head, and she's obviously great at getting that down on paper. And yeah, I think that's certainly one of the massive strengths of the book, where it comes to like the interactions with gods, those fight scenes, our understanding of what Leskia is like as a city. Even back into Godkiller, what Blen Raiden was like, and their journey through Midran, and is probably my takeaway from the whole thing overall. So, I guess we've already done our usual "Would you like to live in this world?" when we did Godkiller, and I have a slightly different question, maybe more linked to our second question, which is, always, what will you do with this book? Would you recommend it? That kind of thing. I think the thing we have to ask with a sequel, and I guess we usually do even with the first book, if it's a part of a series, is, are you still motivated to continue with the trilogy?
I feel like once you get into the second book and there's just one more, you almost, unless it really cocks up, you're going to keep going. But I think for this podcast, we should be willing to ditch even after a second one if they continue to if it fails. But with this one, I've continued to love it. Like, we've critiqued it a lot, but I think that's structural issues rather than storyline issues. The characters continue to be fascinating. The storyline continues to have so many interesting elements. The world building is on point. The action sequences are great. It's just the nature of these books is the thing that's the flaw. So I want to get to the end because I feel that there's going to be a great culmination of this story, which should have been a single book that was just quite big.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm possibly a bit more on the fence. I've loved the world and the building, but the thing I loved most in the first book, and maybe I'm only realising this due to the lack of it in the second, is kissing. And I wonder whether if I'd had more kissing, I would feel more excited about where we're going, or ultimately, I guess if I hadn't had any kissing and it was just dangled there at the end for me to be like, the next book's going to be like 80% kissing, and discovering what that journey is. I think, I wouldn't in any way object to doing the third book, which is it called Faithbreaker, which I believe has very recently come out. But whether I want to kind of go into it as much as we do on these podcasts as a result of what I've read in Sunbringer is I think up for debate. So I think it's the kind of thing that if I could just read it and smash through it, I'd be quite up for it. I don't know. I'm on the fence, I think, is my takeaway.
But the world still seems to be great. I'd still just live in this world, even though it's about to go all to crap, because it's supposed to fall apart with all this extra war that's coming in. But, the mechanics in the world, they're so interesting. It's great.
Yeah. We just need to avoid any major cities, I think. If we're going to live in this world, there's just some little quiet countryside village where no one really cares what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I'll go and hang out with them. I'll take over Elo's bakery.
Yeah, exactly. So we are moving on to our next read for the podcast, and it is City of Brass by Shannon Chakraborty, S.A. Chakraborty, I believe she publishes under.
Yes.
And we will be reading up to the end of chapter 9 for the next episode, where we will be delving in and exploring a brand new world, brand new characters, and I'm really excited about it.
It's also based in the first one we're doing, where it's kind of the base world is our own world.
Yeah.
18th century Cairo is the location.
Yeah.
So that's going to be very cool to have like fantasy realism or whatever it's called.
So yes, get reading for that and join us in the next episode. If you want to let us know your views on Sunbringer, we'd love to hear from you, whether it's on YouTube in the comments section below or on social media at Escapists Anonymous Pod on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Just hit us up, comments, messages, whatever. We'd love to hear what you thought and maybe even discuss some of your comments. Other than that, we look forward to rejoining you in a couple of weeks' time as we start off a new adventure in City of Brass. So all that's left to say is goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.